Welcome to Bespoken Bones with your host, Pavini Moray, connecting ancestors, sex, magic and science. Pavini explores transpersonal tools for erotic wellness every new and full moon, engaging educators, healers, spiritual leaders and scientists in revolutionary dialogue. Get ready to feel good and go deep. This is Bespoken Bones.
Hello, welcome to Bespoken Bones, ancestors at the crossroads of sex, magic, and science. We're in the business of healing trauma, connecting with our roots, and developing radiant erotic wellness in past, present, and future generations. I'm your host, Dr. Pavini Moray, and I'm so excited today to introduce you to Naya Jones. Naya has a PhD in geography. You're a geographer, a healing arts practitioner, a ritual artist, originally from Texas, a queer cis Black woman, and Black Chicana. Her African American and Mexican Chicana roots deeply inspire her collaborations. Since 2008, she has guided meditation and other healing arts fellow Black, Indigenous, and other people of color, all genders and orientations. She collaborates with allies who are explicitly committed to racial justice in their work. Naya owns a community healing arts practice called Rootwork, and her current academic research centers on Black traditional and holistic medicine. She continues to learn old ways with elders. Right now, writing is helping her dream, mourn, and remember joy. And you can check out more about Naya and her work on her website, which is nayajones.com. I'm going to spell it for you. nayajones.com, and it'll also be in the show notes. So, Naya, welcome to Bespoken Bones. I'm so glad that you're here.
I'm excited to be here.
Great. Would you, do you want to start with a breath or a sound of something that reflects any of your practices?
Yes, actually, I brought my rattle along. I want to see if you can hear it okay. Can you hear that?
Yes, that sounds great.
So maybe just a little moment. I love that sound. I often use it even when I'm teaching classes, just to kind of bring people into our bodies and out of our heads and out of all of the news that's around us too.
Why does it work like that? Because I was like, oh, this is so good. But you were rattling?
Right. You know, I don't know what it is about the rattle, and I hear that all the time, and it does the same thing for me. I know I learned about using the rattle from a teacher of mine who I'll call M. Martinez for the purpose of this podcast. And she is a Chicana elder in Texas, and she's the first one who I witnessed using a rattle in ceremonial space, in a ritual space. And that's the first place where I really felt the rattle too. And I was like, what is happening right now? And have had the same experience ever since. And it's definitely become central to when I'm speaking, if I'm in academic spaces, if I'm in non-academic spaces, the rattle is usually with me.
Yeah, it's almost like it scrambles your brain a little bit. Right? Like it interrupts the frequency. You're like, you can't, there's like nothing else but that. At least that was my experience. So, it's kind of like, that's what's happening right now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Definitely a resetting of some kind.
Yeah. It makes me want to move. Mm-hmm. Also, when I hear it, just like, ha, ha, ha. Kind of like when you see a dog get out of the water, they're like, they shake off.
Yes. That's so interesting you share that too, because I've been reflecting on how sometimes when I've said meditation, it took me a few years to realize that people were thinking of meditation in this really stiff kind of way. And when I'm sharing a meditation with people, it's always involved movement. Just like you said, it's always involved an invitation to movement and not just making ourselves be still.
Oh, yeah. My partner really enjoys going to silent retreats where they do that. They sit. And I just can't think of anything worse. Like, it just sounds terrible to me. right? That like, oh, yeah, and I think that that's what the research is showing anyway, is just the tremendous healing potential of moving, right? Moving and sounding.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Tell me about a time in your life where your ancestors have been really present for you.
Yeah, I think when I was first really cognizant and aware of my ancestors being present was this kind of convergence of entering a graduate program for the first, as a first generation college student, and really coming more deeply into my spiritual practice at the same time. And I remember thinking about what my master's thesis was going to be about. And I have often practiced journey work, right? That kind of trance, that drum rhythm, kind of rhythm into meditative work. Again, learned that with the Chicana elder I just mentioned as well. And so that practice really helped me see that I didn't need to necessarily think about what my MA thesis was going to be about, but that the ancestors had some ideas. And I remember this beautiful vision of like Black children with flowers coming out of their mouths. And it was just magnificent. And another Black child with flowers coming out of their mouths, and another Black child with flowers. It was like a conveyor belt, but not that, right? Because it was a beautiful vision in that way. And after that journey work, I remember telling my committee mentor, I want to look at how Afro-Mexican communities, at this point it was in Veracruz, Mexico, are using healing plants. And at that time, I was using more of that language, like using healing plants, whereas today I might say in relationship with healing plants. But that was one of the most potent journeys that really directed kind of my everyday work. And it actually led to me leaving one academic program, going to another, shifting mentors. It was my first experience also with how when spirit and ancestors speak, the response has maybe unintended consequences and openings that you might not even expect. Yeah, it was a beautiful time. I would say that's like 2006, 2007.
Mm-hmm. Of really listening and following that. Yeah, it's so beautiful. I want to ask you about eldership because you've mentioned it a couple of times, and I remember as a young activist, maybe late 20s, early 30s, really feeling when people would say that, I would have this response. It was like a pushback response of like, what do we need elders for? Like, oh, we have to be strong in the fight. And as I'm almost 50, I'm turning 50 this year. As I've gotten older, I'm like, elders are so good, right? And I just wonder if you would, just like talk a little bit about your understanding of like how that's such an essential role, because it sounds like it's been really influential in your practices and being guided by that. And of course, like I think of our relationships with ancestors as a relationship with eldership as well. But anything that you want to talk about?
Yes. Oh, and I love the word that you're using too, eldership. That's really beautiful. And I think I've always been seeking elders, partly because they haven't always been available to me. And so what I mean by that is I'm thinking of, just relationships that haven't always been smooth, maybe an interpersonal family space. I'm thinking of how it's kind of hard to talk about, and I'm pausing because there's so much wounding between and among Black folks. There's so much anti-Blackness among Latinx folks. So as someone who's African American and Chicana, navigating and even locating eldership was quite a journey to begin with, in terms of, number one, who would accept that I was not only saying, yes, I am a Black woman, I'm also saying and owning my mother's lineage as a Chicana white woman, who will also accept me in that fullness. And it kind of brings tears to my eyes because that's not always the case. And so being with and finding elders and not even finding. Sometimes I feel like they appear, right? When the student is ready, they appear, has been so precious. And for me, the elders they've definitely been, some of them have been explicitly healer activists. Some of them have mainly been activists or might call themselves organizers and not specifically healers, but we all know they're doing healing work in different ways. Others, the most recent teacher that I'm working with, Miss Angela Smith here in Milwaukee, lifting up how grateful I am for her, because she refers to herself as a root worker, among other things, as an African-American root worker and Black woman. And so eldership has really been kind of a thing that's been bound up with my identity, that's really taught me a lot of painful things and beautiful things at the same time. In real talk, sometimes there have been gaps, like there's been like a decade between an elder teacher that I've really had on the earth plane, right, in physical form, from 2017 to the present. There's been gaps. And sometimes that has meant that, like you said, the ancestors are the main elders with whom I'm working.
Yeah, I mean, I think you name it well, because elders are human, right? And it's often complicated, especially as, I mean, I'm just thinking about like in trans community, as like language has changed and shifted, and ideas and identities have rapidly evolved. Like sometimes somebody who did a ton of work and who might be a really solid elder, there's like their understandings haven't or don't match kind of more of the current cultural understandings. And then there's like a pain, right? Of that disconnect. But so I don't know. I'm not asking a question really. I'm just thinking of like that we hold elders with complexity. But I wonder what you would say about this, of that we all need somebody to hold us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think and to hold us completely, right? Like
like you were saying.
Yeah, to really practice that together. And I think as I move into how beautiful that you're turning 50, I'm moving closer to 40, and I have like gray hairs coming out, and I'm enjoying all of this, kind of movement, and younger generations of folks are starting to come to me and sometimes say, I would like to learn. I've really been practicing, well, how can I be in relationship with you completely? How do you identify yourself? How is that changing? And also allowing people to evolve. I know when my consciousness journey around Blackness and other like social justice period very much emerged at the same time as I was on my spiritual journey. They were so connected. But I definitely was using different language even to describe myself. And so the world has evolved and people evolve in the context of relationship. So how can we hold each other and allow some space, some breathing room at the same time?
Yeah, I like that. Mm-hmm. I feel like I really try and do that, if not putting elders on pedestals, but also and allowing that breathing room that I think you're talking about, but also just holding the fullness of their humanity. Yeah, so that they can hold the fullness of mine. I want to ask you about, because you said that you were looking for someone who could really hold that complexity of your Blackness, of your whiteness, of being Chicana, of like there's in your lived experience that there's all these different lived experiences, all these different identities that are weaving together inside of you. And yeah, I mean, I wonder if there's like, I mean, I don't know, the question that comes is like, well, what's it like? What's it feel like to be you? And I asked that really respectfully, and I'm just going to give a little bit of context of, I live in a fat body, and I realized at some point, no one's ever actually asked me, like, what's it like to live in your body, And just like, and I told someone that, and then they asked me, and then it felt amazing to be able to talk about it. And just like, oh yeah, this is, these are the benefits, these are the hard things about it. Like, it's complicated, and it's a full, complex human experience. And I just wonder if there's anything that would feel good to you to share and have witnessed about what it's like to be you.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. That is a beautiful question. And thank you for sharing too. Yeah, it feels like one example in this moment when there's been so much powerful uprising and much needed. I am often asking about questions, and I talk about this with other women of color in my life and people of color in my life, but where are the lines of connection between lived experiences and histories? And how, I think one of the most painful things for me to witness in terms of how white supremacy has impacted everyone is how we're not taught and shown how histories are and have always been a relationship. And I'm specifically thinking about African American and Mexican American, Chicanx histories. And I have this challenge, I feel like, because of the way the world is created and the world we've inherited. It's challenging, but it's also a gift of seeing how those histories aren't just connected, but inside each other. Like they literally can embody the same space. When I talk to my abuelito on my mom's side about his experience as a Chicano migrant farmer, I'm also thinking about my dad's side, African American side, and these migrations from the South. And so that feels like a gift. And it took me a while to understand that that's medicine, that kind of liminal borderlands, La Frontera in Gloria Anzaldua's words, is such a beautiful, beautiful place to be. And it's also hard because sometimes Black folks will say things they don't know my identities, right? Because I very much present as Black diaspora. And this is very beautiful. And at the same time, folks will say things about Latinx people or immigration that are deeply problematic. And in other spaces, I'll hear anti-Blackness from non-Black Latinx folks. And so grounding down, I feel like part of the reason I'm so involved in the practice is to ground down and claim space and inhabit the crossroads that is Blackness, and in this particular kind of way. It feels like the color deep purple when you're asking about what it feels like. It feels like that color.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find such a vastness in the kind of liminality that you're describing, right? It can be overwhelming, I think, sometimes. And also just that magical space of walks between, right? Of being in those interim thresholds, borderland spaces of what becomes possible there when our edges aren't so defined, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What do you find about, those, I'm just curious if when you're, I don't know if this is your experience or not, but I'm just imagining that it might be if when you're, because you said sometimes I have really powerful, beautiful experiences of being seen and validated in one identity. And then sometimes those are really painful when it invalidates or oppresses another part of my identity. Right.
Yeah.
And I just wonder about you're a geographer. And so what is that crossing like for you, or how do you navigate? I'm just trying to think of what are the geography words? And they're probably stupid colonizer words. I'm what's your compass? What? Sorry if that's the case. I'm not trying to be all colonizer about it, but you get what I'm saying. Of how do you move, and how do you shift, and how do you decide when to highlight this part of your identity, or kind of what's your process around it?
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's beautifully put. And before we talked, I had written down the word compass in some way. So maybe reclaiming that word in this space in a healing way. But I really appreciate your question about shifting and moving, because as you were asking the question, and what I've been feeling, especially lately, is this sense of not shifting. There's almost a refusal that feels so beautifully spirited and divine. And I'm actually, we keep hearing the word pivot. And if I hear it one more time, probably I might just scream. very loudly in public. But I will not shift. I want to dwell here where those roads come together and
at the intersection.
Yes, and dwell and ask kind of what you were saying, what happens here? How am I able to, maybe I turn sometimes to face a particular road or direction. Sometimes, even in my research, there's aspects of my research that are really deep in African American ancestor work. It's all about root work, right? And hoodoo and traditional medicine that has been suppressed and stigmatized and denied and refused. But there are other aspects of my work where I focus more on Afro-Latinx experiences. So blackness is always there, but there are different ways that maybe I kind of focus in and pull out, but it's always this stillness. And I feel like I'm claiming it even as I'm talking with you and we're sharing. It. Yeah, like I will not move. I refuse. And I think that is absolutely important. And I hope that other people who are listening to this and feeling like maybe they need to, whether it's, because it's there's all kinds of refusal going on now. Now I'm really feeling it, right? Because it's about the Black Chicanidad. And it's also, right? It's also about, am I a scholar or practitioner? Am I a healer or an activist? All of those things are also where I dwell at these kind of hyphenated spaces. And I know I'm not alone there. I'm sure people are nodding and feeling it as they're listening too, just like we are. But there's multiple layers of refusal. And it feels, and I like the word refusal. I've been playing with it because it doesn't feel like it's necessarily about somebody else. It's more like a coming in and dwelling. And yeah, it's disruptive. It is disruptive. But that is not my problem, and it is not my fault. It is not your problem. It is not your fault. So what happens when we dwell here anyway? I'm feeling a lot of power from that place.
Yeah, I mean, it's my sense that the place that you're talking about, where the refusal rests or is that it's like it's a deeply embodied place, right? That there's that you're sourcing deeply into. I will not choose. I cannot choose. This is who I am. This is where I'm putting down the root, right? This is where I'm dropping that taproot into this intersection. And yeah, I'm wondering as you root in refusal and of really claiming that space of the intersection, what's happening in your art and what's happening in your practice and what's happening in your healing? Like, what do you notice?
I do notice that rooting down, and maybe that's where partly my obsession with roots comes from, whether it's addressing root causes or, for example, another thing we're hearing a lot is there's a triple threat for Black people with the pandemic, state terror, right? Police violence and lack of employment. And I'm like, no, the root is white supremacy, among other things. Mm-hmm. Okay, so keep digging the root work, roots and ancestors. I feel like in the root chakra, so in my body, as I'm talking about it with you and feeling through, it definitely feels rooted in like the lower chakras and down, and then allows me to stand up and pick my head up and, hold my shoulders back and say, here I am, I exist. There's a sense of deal with it, right, as well. And in the art and practice, it comes out in, I think, these fierce ways, but also there's a gentleness and a tenderness that I find healing and nourishing, because so many of the elders I appreciate have walked this path that has been full of activism and ferocity, sometimes in a very quiet way, and sometimes in a way that's like, just come to my house, right? Maybe as a form of protest, or after the protest, or remember that during the protest, my house exists. That kind of way of the work is really beautiful to me. And I find that I gravitate towards that sense of the inner work and the inner life justice and occupying the crossroads quite a bit.
How is it when you're in your healing practice? How are you offering this or supporting others? Because I'm guessing that there's like a lot of permission that has to be given, either from someone else or individually, personally, right? I mean, I just think of that. That's the thing of like claiming any kind of body space or sovereignty or physical space in the world, that there's just that, like, I get to do this, right? This is okay. And I just wonder if, like, with the young folks who are coming to you looking for guidance, how are you offering these things to them, or how are you sharing with them, or, how are you guiding them?
Yeah. I know I opened up an apprenticeship with my healing arts practice recently, and just kind of going one at a time, one lovely person who shows up at a time. Mm-hmm. And I didn't ask if I could share their name here today, but lifting them up. The person I'm working with is maybe like 10 years younger than I am, 15, 12, something like that. And one thing that we've been doing together when practice has been really working with the voice and the body and how it feels to occupy our bodies together, just by playing with picking our voices up and taking them down and slowing down, and really just experimenting and exploring how does it feel to hold space with different tempo and pace. What might this look next time they hold space? When did it really feel good for them to organize? When did it feel not so good? Why? Right? Just really creating a space for us to explore, again, that inner life of the work, that even in the midst of so much beautiful healing justice movement and conversation around somatics and social justice, I feel like there is still a disconnect between, at least in my experience and in circles that I'm moving in, between justice work and sitting with the work, like allowing ourselves and creating spaces for that. So I feel like that's a lot of what I've been doing. And it's even become part of my research methodology, is really somatic now. So when I'm asking, it's mostly been cis Black women in that particular space about their holistic practices or holistic healing that they've been seeking out, we stop and pause and consider, where do you feel that in your body? How does it feel to experience that kind of medicine? Why do you seek that out? And how do you find it inside you or outside of you? So those spaces, those deeply somatic spaces.
Yeah, I mean, what I really am hearing is just how our brains and our bodies move at different speeds, and the apprenticeship. And I want to talk more about that because I am really fascinated by that idea. In the apprenticeships, part of the space that you're offering is experiential, to allow the body and the mind to be more integrated, right? To let the kind of maybe some of the information that's come in at the mind level be processed and be acknowledged and be felt and be articulated, like at the body level, right? That there's that like holding that's happening of those disparate parts coming together. And I know that I don't know if that's, first of all, I just want to say, is that accurate in how you would describe it?
Yes, I think so. And I think it is about that, again, maybe in this sense, the body being the dwelling place, where the crossroads come together, as you so beautifully are talking about with your work as well, and somatic work. And so there is that sense in that they're not separate, that there's this, when I'm learning and practicing about old ways or traditional indigenous medicine, especially with Black diaspora roots, but this feels globally indigenous too, there doesn't feel like there's, right, that separateness. So it does feel like an integration, a remembering that it's all connected and that we're decolonizing ourselves together in a felt way.
Yeah, I am remembering as you're speaking about this, that when I was in my dissertation process and I was writing my literature review, which is just hellish. I mean, maybe some academics out there think it's awesome. I found it particularly a certain kind of hell. And my research was on transgenerational trauma, and somehow it didn't connect for me that if I was reading all of this research about transgenerational trauma, Holocaust trauma, war trauma, all of these, the ways that transgenerational trauma epigenetics has been academically researched, I thought I could just get it like a pass. Like I was just going to be all yeah, trauma, and what ended up happening was like, it was really impactful in my body, that my own experience of transgenerational sexual trauma was like super present, and I actually had to pause in the work, and it was really catalyzed by doing all the reading, right, about it. And I mean, of course, in retrospect, I'm like, oh yeah, that's what happens, right? That makes total sense. But there's just that, and maybe this is, and I would not discount that this is some version of white supremacy, but just this idea of like, oh yeah, I can like research this stuff academically, right? But it's not going to impact my body. Mm-hmm. I'm going to be able to, and I just wonder, because I know that you do this, right? You integrate your academic practice, your scholarship, and your healing arts. And anything that you want to speak to about, I mean, we're talking about it with your apprentice. What's, I don't know. What
I know, that's beautiful. I like that. I dig it.
But anything about that, of like, how do you see this like the weaving of the scholarship and healing arts?
Yes. And wow. Yes. Thank you for what you shared too, because you reminded me that even while I was doing my PhD work on gentrification, and which is the violence of it, right? Of gentrification and Black urban removal. And again, yes, doing these readings and interviews, and had to pause, just like you shared. And to a degree where, I mean, I didn't write for months. It took me a while. And it is interesting that when I did that pause, I focused more on guiding, as I'm looking back, healing arts and meditation with fellow queer community of color and fellow Black women. I noticed that is where I went to. And so at that time, it's this integrating, this bringing together has really been a journey in and of itself, because even during the dissertation process and the PhD, which has all kinds of things going on, right? Being in the academy, the politics of it, being the only Black person in my department as a student, from African American and Chicana, just really, there was a lot going on. And so what I realized after I finished my PhD, I again took a pause, because I wasn't really sure about the academy at all and how I would be in relationship with it. That I realized that it was time for me, if I was going to continue, to really approach the work differently and in a more embodied way, and to bring together this healing arts work that I'd been doing and building and crafting with people with the scholarship. And there had been especially Latinas in my life who were doing that already, and Chicanas, Tejanas, they would probably call themselves too, who are already doing that. So that was beautiful. And then, of course, there's so many, sometimes I call them foremothers, right? Like Audre Lorde and Gloria Anzaldúa and M. Jackie Alexander, all of these beautiful folks who had already been doing this. So I felt like I had some kind of blueprint. But what it looks like now is just this unapologetic, embodied, somatic, and if it feels right for me as well, deeply, explicitly spiritual way of teaching, research, gathering story, all of it. And so it's become the approach. And I'm so excited. I haven't really been deeply embodied. My partner and I, when we've taught together, sometimes we've brought in some embodied aspects, but I haven't been as embodied in my pedagogy, my teaching approach, as I'd like to be. And so I'm excited to practice that as I start teaching again in probably January in a university setting. So yes, it is still coming together and still being named for me, I think, and still being articulated.
Yeah, I mean, what strikes me is that it's just a completely different paradigm, right? It's not like, okay, we're going to be in academia and we're going to be breathing to our pelvises and then we'll, do all of this, whatever, heady work. But it's like, I was thinking about, I went to a professional conference last summer, NC SexCon. It was a bunch of sexuality professionals, and it was organized by Black women primarily. And it was like the best sex educators conference I'd ever been to. And it was because it was so embodied, and it was like, I mean, there was just because I'd been going to kind of the white organized sexuality conferences for years, and it always felt so like, it felt a certain kind of way, of just like, this is like, I just felt like my butt being really tight, like we weren't breathing, and like, oh, it was, and yet we're talking about sexuality. And then I went to this conference and I was just like, oh, like this is a totally different way to be. Right. And it's not like, oh, let's bring this into that other thing. It's like, no, this is just its own way of being with it. It's its own paradigm of integrating the professional, the academic, the embodied, the sexuality. Right. It just was. Yeah. And I hear that in what you're talking about. And I feel like some of the other folks I've interviewed, Black academics on the show have also just brought that of like, this is just a totally different way to be. And it's, I don't know, in my experience of it, just so much relief. It's such a relief, it's such a relief to be like, okay, it doesn't have to be so fucking brainy and tight.
Right.
There can be magic and healing and spirit in this work. It doesn't have to be separate.
That's beautiful to hear. I know there's other folks who have been traveling in a similar way and also are hyphenated, right? Archaeologists, artists, and or like myself, geographer, cultural worker, in these ways. And it feels like a relief to practice in that way. And I also do experience and face resistance. That then again leads back to the circle, to the root, right? And requires the embodied spiritual somatic work, because there can be resistance.
Like personal or other than you? Or?
It's a beautiful question. Not so much from within myself, I guess, but from other academics, for example, right?
For sure.
Yes. And sometimes academics of color, just like, whoa, like what is going on here?
What is that rattle? What are you doing with that rattle?
Why did you bring that to an academic conference? And and it's such a joy to bring it. And it's so beautiful too, though, because while there's sometimes resistance, there's also these openings where people will come up to me afterwards, because I have presented with the rattle before and just been very explicit about my location, not just like positionality, right? In terms of, which is important, race, class, gender, orientation, all these different things, but like my spiritual orientation and somatic orientation to the work. And afterwards, folks, especially, people of color coming up to me, sometimes also white folks who have been doing somatic and racial justice work, saying, I've really wanted to do this in this space, and just, you've kind of inspired me or given me courage to do so, and I'm saying that because it's just a reminder that it's not even about me, what I mean? Like, it just must be done. I don't feel like I have a choice of whether or not to bring these things together. I mean, if I don't do it, I won't survive. That's what it feels like. It feels that vital, and it feels like it also lifts up other people's aliveness.
It's so much harder to fight our purpose than to surrender to it. Even though surrendering to it and being on that path is so hard, right? it's also just what I hear you saying is that I have to do this, right? I have to. It's what I'm here to do. Yeah.
Yeah.
Speak to me about inspiration. I'm feeling very inspired by this conversation. It's a word that you used of because it's a particular cultural moment, and revolution is here, I think, in many ways, and inspiration feels like a really important resource to be grounding in. And how, so I want to hear you just like say whatever you want to say about inspiration, but I think like my deeper level of the question is the inspiration that comes from the rooted place of the crossroads, like the inspiration that isn't just all words or up high in the body, but is like that thrum of the earth's pulse, that level of inspiration where it's just like, that's not going anywhere. Right. And just what do you know about that? What do you want to say?
I like that. I like that. That's not going anywhere. I like that a lot. And one thing that is coming up for me again, you can tell I'm really not feeling the word pivot because I hear it so much, pivot in the media.
And next to talking about
I was like, I don't want to talk about pivoting. And one of the reasons that I brought that up, though, is because I've been feeling grounded or at least practicing grounding and dwelling in the crossroads has felt like I don't need to pivot. And like I think someone asked me, how are you pivoting your work right now? And I was kind of confused by the question because I was like, well, if I'm grounded in the deepest inspiration and in the dream, why would I need to shift my work? And that has been leading to so many different levels of inspiration for me. Because on one hand, thinking about some of my recent work has been about racial trauma and being surveilled while accessing food while Black. And it meant that, like you were talking about as well, revisiting traumatic moments of other people, sometimes videos. That work wasn't inspiring to me. I was motivated to do that work because I'm inspired by Black life and living. It's not like the death inspired me. And so really getting clear about that has been so important, and how I even articulate the work I do. Like, it's not about Black death, it's about Black living and life. But how can I talk about Black death? Because it is so central to the living, and living while Black in these ways that are so, like you said, in this moment, visible, made visible and remembered, some lives more than others, right? If we're thinking about Black trans women and Black trans people. But I think what I'm saying is just the stillness has been inspiring, the not pivoting. Maybe there's a bit of refusal again and not running after the most recent grant, okay, in the academic space that's grounded in Black death and demise rather than in Black life. And I also have been reading a lot of Toni Morrison and had a quote that I wanted to share, because you asked so beautifully if I had a story to share, and I said I didn't, and then I realized that Toni Morrison is also an ancestor. So let me see this beautiful, it's just one line, and it's just that in her essay, Memory, Creation, and Fiction, she writes that memory, no matter how small the piece remembered, demands my respect, my attention, and my trust. And she also does say that memory is a form of willed creation. The point is to dwell on the way it appeared and why it appeared in that particular way. And so that has been really beautiful, and I've been coming back to that a lot too, as a source of inspiration. Memory, how people hold memory, what people remember and know about Black living and life. And that's really been so helpful, just to remember that I'm still breathing and other people are too.
Yeah, I love that. I'm just thinking about that piece around memory. like we are trying to remember some kind of something, aren't we? You know, just, and I don't know, I was thinking about it earlier today about like, I don't know that there's like, maybe you have thoughts on this, this essential balance of power where people are accountable and sovereign and in right relationship and not in dominion. You know, I don't know if we can like remove all those layers to get to some essential goodness. I don't know. I think that's a little bit fairy tale version of what I want. But I think in what you're talking about in the remembering of Black living, of that there's just kind of as it relates to inspiration, it's also the like again rooting into that aliveness, rooting into what's joyful and good and powerful. And yeah, I'm just thinking of this poem that I heard recently. I don't know if you've heard it, and I can't remember the poet, but it was "Give the Police to the Grandmas." Have you come across that one yet?
I don't think I have. That's
It's
beautiful.
it's amazing, but she's just talking about the poet's just talking about I think she's a Black woman, and she's like, yeah, give the police to the let the Black grandmas be the police,
Mm.
and they'll drive around in their Cadillacs, and they'll just like look at you, and they'll just look at you until you look down, and that's and right, and when you talk about like the memory of Black living, of being that inspiration, that's what comes to mind of like there's that yeah, just that in touchness of like how do we ground into that, right, that kind of memory of yeah, just the aliveness that we've witnessed. Yeah, am I getting it?
Yeah, no, it's so, I love what you're getting, and I like the word goodness. I really think that after our talk, I'll have to sit with that because I felt a response to it. And yeah, just like yes to all of it. And that Black living is living, period, right? It's
Right.
earth and human and water, and that it's all of these things and so deeply connected to life. I think when I still feel so skeptical about change and transformation right now, even as I hold maybe the dream or the remembering, the imagining that you're talking about too, because I think what will be a sign for me is when there is more of a mass gathering around, in the case of Black Lives Matter, for example, actually Black lives and Black power
Yeah.
and Black aesthetics in a way that is respectful and dignified. And I feeling what you're saying, I do not think that that is possible in the present world order. And so there's that other space, that dream space. This also feels like a between space of some kind of, what is there then? And maybe that's why I think I focus so much on sovereignty. Like, I love that word. And on things like autonomy and doing for ourselves, and we have what we need, because I think that the future does lie in Black geographies, Indigenous geographies, ways of knowing, not in like a weird biological essentialist sense, right? But because of what people have lived and survived and known, you know?
I mean, it would just be such a shame to miss out on that, is how I stand with
Yeah.
it. Like, I want that. I want to get to have that. I want to get to experience the Black grandmas as the police. You know what I mean? Like there's such a, I mean, relief just is the word of just like when we allow those experiences to guide the paradigm or the reality that we're living in, it just feels so much more grounded.
Yeah.
So I want to just finish by asking you, Naya, about your projects and what you want to share about anything around the meditations or the art or the healing practice, anything that feels like this is the time where you get to invite the listeners into your world in any way that you want.
Yes. So building off of what we just said, I'm really so grateful to be in collaboration with people who are like creating these pockets, right? I think of the grandmas being the police and in other ways of moving in the world. And so one of those partnerships is with Miss Angela Smith, who I mentioned before, and she's a partner in the work. She's also a teacher for me, and we recently received a folk arts apprenticeship grant. So while I started taking apprentices, I am also apprenticing in African American old ways and root work. While root work has been the name of my healing arts practice for a very long time, I've mainly learned through, let's say, the astral plane, which has been beautiful and powerful, like ancestors, guides, and books. And so now I'm learning with a teacher on the earth plane in a beautiful way. And I wanted to start with that one, because it leads into some of my research that I'd love to share with people through my e-letter. If you go to my website, I share updates on the projects that I'm doing in terms of story gathering. So I'm gathering stories of, right now, mainly in Milwaukee, but perhaps expanding Black holistic healing and practice and what that looks like and feels like. And also looking at Black gardens beyond the South. There's a lot of work on Black gardens. In this case, I am talking more about African American gardening practices. There's a lot more work about Black folks gardening in the South than there are works about Black folks doing home gardening, like their back, front yard, side of the yard, you know what I mean, in the West, in the Midwest. So that's also a pathway of my work right now. And I write about all of this in my e-letter, which is not just like a series of updates, which are very lovely, but also includes somatic and cultural analysis, if you will, of the world that we're living in. So I invite people to join me there. And I also have some meditations on my website that may be nourishing during these times.
And again, that's nayajones.com. Yeah?
Yes, that's it.
Okay. NayaJones.com. Again, it'll be in the show notes. Naya, I am so delighted with our conversation, and I just have a lot of love and gratitude in my heart that you showed up to this to talk about these things, and I get to meet you in this way. And really, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So grateful to spend this time with you.
So if you have been listening to the podcast, I've been speaking with Naya Jones. I'd love to hear how this conversation lands for you. I always like to hear what's happening out there with the podcast and what are people doing with it. And I'm sure Naya would love to hear from you as well. So you can feel free to be in contact with me through the bespokenbones.com website. I'm also always happy to hear your suggestions of other awesome folks that we should have on this show. And we have a YouTube channel now. The shows are all on YouTube. So if you ever want to do that, that's another option for you. So that's it for this episode. I am Pavini Moray. This is the Bespoken Bones podcast, and we will be back every full and new moon with more embodied goodness and ancestral wisdom.